to the weekly Banter session for the Great Collaboration, whose purpose is to help people find their way through the plethora of information about climate change and the like on the internet, and to be able to impose their own plans to the greatest efficiency. And to that end, we have today giving us a presentation from the Friends of the Earth, Toby Bridgman, who's going to enthrall us, I trust, with all the layers of data that you can achieve from the Friends of the Earth and use as required. So Toby, if you're all happy, over to you, please.
Thanks, Graham. I had intended to produce a very slick presentation for today, but the election announcement, I think, happened after I signed up, and so we've been quite busy sort of preparing for that. And I've also just had a dentist appointment this morning, so half of my mouth is sort of numb and the other half is in quite a lot of pain. So I'm trying to, I can think I'm talking clearly, but my mouth feels a bit unusual. So sorry if it's if anything is unclear, please do ask me to repeat. So I've got a couple of slides to show, not too many, and then I've also got just some maps. We tend to make maps of the data where we can. Let me try and find if I make that full screen. Does that, can you guys see that as full screen slide?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so I'm from Friends of the Earth. Hopefully people have heard of Friends of the Earth, but if not, we're a sort of environmental campaigning organisation, and we work on the sort of themes of climate. We have a very strong climate campaign, obviously, but we also work around nature, and we also work around sort of the right and the right to protest as well. Those are our three big campaigning areas. I sit in a team, the Policy and Insights team, which is essentially the research team at Friends of the Earth, and we have a sort of small environmental data unit there, where as a key part of our work, we believe is conducting data analysis and getting and producing statistics that help support our kind of national campaigns, but also give data to our local groups. We have a big network of local groups all across the country, across England and Wales and Northern Ireland. Friends of the Earth Scotland is another entity, I should add. So we think it's really important that we get kind of local statistics to help support local people make action, make things happen on their ground. So as a result of that, we produce quite a lot of analysis, but we also produce maps and tools. And there's an example on the right of the screen there of a tool we've got called Near You, where you can put in your postcode and you can see a series of local data covering various topics in your local authority. And we've got a tool that we're releasing this week, which is similar but kind of a constituency level in the run up to the general election, which will show statistics at each constituency, enable you to email prospective candidates, kind of challenging on where they stand on various things. So we won't work alone. We one of our concepts is very much to try and do things with open data, and make that publicly available as well. But we are aware that a lot of other people are doing similar work and have a lot of expertise. So we try and work in collaboration where we can, or work with people who we know have got the expertise to do the things that we don't. So we work with universities and other charities and independent kind of organisations and special expertise, and we work with a couple of government agencies like Natural England and the Environment Agency as well. An example of a kind of recent work we did on that was we started a project. We actually did a sort of hackathon with some postdoctoral students at the University of Exeter, trying to understand if we could map where the most suitable areas were for onshore renewable energy, so onshore wind and onshore solar farms. So we worked at the university on that, and then we also then took some of that analysis and then we worked with some kind of industry experts and trade bodies such as Solar UK, Renewables UK, and Octopus Energy, to kind of get them on board, make sure we were saying the right sort of things, right, make sure our messaging aligned with what they're trying to say. As a result of that, we kind of put out a policy piece and some data and an interactive map, which I'll show you in a bit. And one other thing, we also sort of this idea of collaboration and understanding that lots of other work is going on in the similar fields. We're also kind of part of a wider group of organisations that have started up what's called an environmental change data for change network, so really an environmental data network where we're trying to bring people together, avoid duplication of work, and also to see if we can do sort of new collaborative projects together, bringing in expertise as well. So I can put a link to that in the chat if anyone's interested in sort of signing up. But we've got a kind of online platform where discussions and various data get shared and that sort of thing. It's in its infancy really, so it's growing, but yeah, that's kind of a big part of our work, is kind of bringing people together as well. Yeah, so anyway, on to today. I just kind of wanted to say that a lot of the data we produce, particularly the sort of mapping and local data we produce, is what is done at what's called LSOA level, which is, for those who don't know, it's a kind of really a sort of census unit from the censuses that they conduct. It stands for Lower Super Output Area and covers about, I think, roughly about 1,000 households, so a population of up to about sort of 3,000 people. They tend to be quite uniform in their population size, but obviously not uniform in their land area. So they're a lot smaller in cities and a lot bigger in rural areas. That's kind of a long way of saying we don't currently produce a lot of data at kind of using the parish boundaries. But I had a kind of, I've worked with parish boundaries a little bit in the past in a previous role. And I was just kind of reminding myself of kind of how parishes and LSOAs relate. And I think a lot of the LSOA boundaries probably take a lot of guidance from sort of historical parish boundaries. So there is quite a lot of significant overlap. In this slide here, I've just showing the sort of darker green lines are the parish boundaries, and the orange lines are the LSOA boundaries. So where you can't see an orange line, it's often hidden by the parish boundary is on top of that line. So there is pretty good overlap. I think what tends to happen is general trend. It's probably different, but in some, it is in Somerset. So in Wales, you can see that Wales is one parish, but made up of about maybe about 5 or 6 LSOA levels. And in more rural areas, you might have one LSOA that's made up of multiple parishes. So on the top left, I think Compton Bishop, Badgeworth, Weir, and Chapel Allerton, they're all part of one LSOA, but they're 4 parishes. So it's the boundaries kind of overlap, but how they kind of distribute is slightly differently aligned. So I just thought it's important to know that, because I haven't got any data obviously at parish level, but I think quite a lot of the LSOA data we do have is usable and can be shown kind of what's going on the ground in different parishes across England and Wales. So just to summarize some of the data analysis that we've looked at, this is kind of like highlights reel, I guess, if you like, and some of the more relates to some of the publications we've put out, and kind of use multiple data sets together to kind of try and create something that's useful and interesting to people. So it kind of they cover, like I said earlier, when we cover sort of energy and climate change, pollution, nature, and we don't often do a lot of work directly in transport, but we were aware there's a bit of a data gap in kind of local transport data, so we did a project on that last year as well. And I'll showcase a bit more detail of these in a bit. But just to describe some of them. So when the energy crisis kind of took hold a couple of years ago, we were aware that it became really one of our important flagship campaigns. We've got warm home campaigns calling for sort of free insulation across the country, and we're really pushing for that in the next general election. But as part of telling that story, we wanted to understand which communities are most likely to be impacted by the energy crisis. So we looked at bringing in various data on energy consumption, the efficiency of homes, income levels, to create what we call these energy crisis hotspots. So it's places where it's kind of a measure of fuel poverty, but using slightly different data than the official kind of data uses, to just really pinpoint communities where the data showed that there was bills were higher and homes were more inefficient, and incomes were at the lower end of the spectrum, to kind of identify the communities that really needed to or would benefit the most from a national insulation program. Is that a question coming in, or background noise? Do feel free to ask any questions, by the way, if I'm not clear on anything. We did some work with the University of Manchester, bringing in we commissioned them to do it on our behalf, but they produced some really detailed data on extreme weather risks. So that was flooding and overheating, but also bringing in social vulnerability. So looking at the kind of physical risks of which parts of the country are most likely to be at risk of flooding and high summer temperatures, and then also bringing in social data to understand which communities most sort of socially vulnerable to those things as well. Like I mentioned, the renewable energy work we did recently with University of Exeter. So this is looking at just in England, actually, this data was for, but looking at parcels of land, really kind of layering exclusion criteria across the country. So ruling out any sort of nature sites, any kind of protected sites for bird migration, ruling out obviously infrastructure such as roads and railways, airports, buffering around those, heritage properties and heritage sites, a series of layers basically identifying, okay, well, what will, I will also sort of agricultural land, et cetera, to kind of, so where does that, what does that leave us with? Whereabouts is that land, and how much energy could we generate from that? So we've got a map where you can see that, and I'll show that in a bit. Around pollution, we've done, I think a lot of our data is kind of really does focus on the kind of energy and climate change stuff, but we do also do other things. So DEFRA produced some data we use to kind of map again to neighborhood level, to LSO level, looking at nitrogen dioxide and particulates. We've used the sewage bill data. We've been using it for a couple of years. Obviously, it's become very topical recently. So we continue to use that in our tools when we produce local kind of statistics on sewage spills in your area. Around nature, we've done some work around understanding how much accessible green space is available to local communities. So this is the key word here is accessible. So this is areas of land you can freely access and spend time in, rather than just see, but it's sort of private or have to pay money to get into. So kind of understanding. Initially, that came out of during the pandemic, when it became quite apparent there was a kind of big disparity between green open spaces that people could look at. But it's increasingly, we've used it increasingly over the years, because it's just a really good metric of understanding who's got access to green space. And then also in nature, we got an excellent company called Telefsulis to do some very clever mapping with using radar and LiDAR data to identify individual tree species and map their coverage across the country. So we've got a great map on that showing tree canopy cover. And then finally, we did some work with the excellent Malcolm Morgan at University of Leeds, who's a transport and GIS expert, looking back through historical timetables and showing the frequency of bus services as they were in 2010, and then showing them, we did it last year, so it's 2023, and looking at where bus services, the frequency of bus services have declined rapidly or dramatically over the last decade or so, which shows some pretty harsh cuts to bus services, particularly in rural areas. And then just to say, well, I'm currently working on a project which we've called the Index of Multiple Environmental Deprivation. That's a project that came out of the Data Network, working with Birmingham Local Authority, Natural England, the Environment Agency, and Strathclyde University, to try and bring some of the data I've described here together to understand where all these things kind of combine to create sort of multiple environmental deprivation, if you like. So that's still ongoing. I haven't published that yet. Hoping to do something, sort of first version of that in July. And again, yeah, make that available. I should say all these things are, or at least we would like to, if they're not publicly available, if you need or want this data, we can make it available via email. The long-term and ideal plan is to get all this available from our website. And a lot of it is sort of downloadable from our website. But obviously it's a sort of balance between getting stuff out that's important and kind of keep refreshing, keep getting new data out with maintaining old data and making old data available. So yeah, apologies if it's not always clear to access, but if there is ever a problem, I'm more than happy to kind of email data out. Anyway, oh yeah, I'll make the slides available after this. There were just some links there to some of those data stories I've talked about. If I just shut that down, and then I'll just give you, I think I've got time, maybe 5 minutes, just to talk about some of those data things that I mentioned. So can you guys see the map screen? Yeah, cool. This is the energy crisis hotspots data. So actually, if I put it by neighborhood, so anywhere purple we've identified as a place where Incomes are towards the lower end of the spectrum, energy bills are high, and homes are really inefficient, some of the most inefficient homes. So you get pockets of kind of urban areas around London and Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Bradford, etc. And then you also get some rural pockets in East Anglia, Lincolnshire, and Cornwall and South Wales. And a lot of these tools we have pop-ups available, so you can click on an area. I tend to, if there's only a area, I tend to zoom in. I'm in Bristol, so I tend to, as we always do, sort of tend to look in our local area. But you can click on any of these areas, and it should tell you some statistics. My computer's very slow today, so it can be a lot of time to load. So click on area, you can see that it's in Tewkesbury local authority. This is the local MP or was last election. Our estimated average fuel bill, and then some statistics about how many homes are insulated and how many homes could benefit from various insulation measures. And you can also show that by constituency. So if we change it to constituency mode, you can then click on Gloucester and it will tell you the sort of summary for Gloucester. So again, sort of summary stats at Gloucestershire level. Just trying to think if there's anything else to say on that map. More of time and showing a spectrum of things. Yeah, okay, we can always go back to these if there's questions about these in particular. This is our extreme weather kind of map. So this is showing, let me hide that, areas that are most at risk of overheating in the summer. So this is periods of 27.5 degrees or more for at least 5 days. So this is areas that are most likely to be affected by that scenario. The light color is the areas that affect, and the darker color is the areas that are also socially vulnerable to those impacts. And there's a similar map that shows the effects of flooding. Obviously, overheating tends to affect the sort of south and the east more, but flooding is kind of distributed more across England and Wales. And again, I think, yeah, you can sort of click on an area and just get some statistics, like how many people are exposed to flooding, and is it socially vulnerable or not. Moving on to a slightly different map. So this is our renewables map. So we've got, I'll take off the green is the national parks, so just take them off for clarity. So if we zoom into an area, the shapes tend to kind of, get more complex as you zoom in. So we've got, this is the pockets of areas that are most suitable for solar PV. We're aware of the slight contentiousness of this map, and when we put it out, we put it around as saying that this is the areas that could be most suitable. We aren't saying that every single part of this that's orange should be covered in solar PV, and we're kind of sending some of this data to local authorities to help them work with and understand where they might sort of prioritize certain parts of it. So don't necessarily look at this map and say, oh my God, Friends of the Earth is saying this should all be solar PV. It's just trying to understand which parts of which land could be considered, and obviously we'd encourage like full local assessments to be done and public consultation as well to make sure that was done correctly. But it's just really to kind of help thinking and planning. So there's solar PV, and there's also wind as well, and there's some places where both wind, that's in purple, wind and solar might be suitable together. So that's the green. And again, you can click on these areas and it'll give you little statistics about the total area of land and what might be possible in terms of installed capacity and what might be realistically annual generation from those pockets of land. We've also got some stats on how close they are to the substations, so the electricity grid, bearing in mind that connections are expensive and take time. So you can filter that map to say, well, actually, we're interested in areas that are close to the grid, and that kind of knocks off a few pockets of land as well. So that's our renewables map. I'm sorry if this is a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Air pollution is fairly straightforward. This is looking at background levels of particulates and NO2, and mapped again to those LSOAs, those community boundaries. The redder the colour, obviously the higher the levels of air pollution, and you can see the kind of rural areas and the road network kind of show up with this. You can see that sort of M5 winding down there for NO2. So yellow is on the sort of borderline of what the World Health Organization recommends as a safe limit. Above yellow into red is kind of above World Health Organization's. Sorry, my numb mouth. That's difficult. And then blue is obviously towards the other end of the spectrum and lower. And you can look at PM2s for that, which is a slightly different the World Health Organization set very stringent targets for small particulates. So a large most of the country was sort of above those, but you can see it concentrated, particularly in London. And so agriculture is responsible for quite a lot of particulate emissions as well. So that's where you get some in East Anglia as well. So that's air pollution. A couple more, I think. There was this is the tree map. So this is the clever bit of analysis I was explaining using kind of LiDAR data and mapping data, so you can sort of zoom in. This isn't at LSOA level. This is actual kind of where the mapping identified actual pockets of trees. So kind of, again, once you get closer, it kind of, the computer catches up with things. There we go. And this has got neighborhood boundaries on it. So these purple lines here are neighborhood boundaries. So you can I think click on an area and it'll give you a neighbor. Yeah, there you go. So in this community, in this neighborhood, there's 24% cover of trees, and it's in the top third, and it's in the least deprived areas. So as part of this work, we were looking at, is there a correlation between income deprivation and tree canopy cover? And to a certain extent there was, particularly in, as you'd expect, really in urban areas. And as part of this map as well, we also did some modelling to understand which parts of land don't currently have trees but could be reforested, and that's the yellow pockets here. So there's kind of opportunity to reforest there, and a subset of that is the orange, which also could be kind of fully rewilded as well. And then finally, transport map. So I mentioned the transport map. I've got that in neighborhoods. Yeah. So this is showing, just remind yourself what it's showing now. It's quite a difficult bit of work. So this timetable data, and it's looking at the kind of number of stopping services, all services that pass through an area and stop in an area. So counting those per hour, and then coming up with a kind of daytime average. So that was done in 2010, and then also 2023. And there was a sort of comparison made with how frequent those services used to be and how they are now. So anywhere that's kind of yellow, orange, or red has seen a decline in frequency of bus services stopping, and anywhere green has seen an increase. Of course, change doesn't necessarily tell you the frequency either. So this is something we're looking to evolve, actually. So initially in Cornwall, you think, oh wow, so Cornwall's have got better, but actually if you click on it, you see, well, it's gone from 2 an hour to 3.5 an hour. Whereas if you click in somewhere like London, you can see that it's gone. It's gone from 36 an hour to 57 an hour. So we're aware it's a kind of slight simplification of showing the data. So it's something to evolve, but it at least gives an initial snapshot of, and particularly if you go to higher levels. So if you look at sort of transport authorities, you can kind of see the picture across the country as overall decline, with the exception of London, really, over that time. So I think that was all I kind of lined up to show. There's obviously more to do, and I think what I've tried to do there is show the kind of things, the analysis where we've kind of brought various different data sets together, and then produced a kind of output. We obviously kind of use a lot of underlying data there that's kind of broadly available for others as well. So EPC data, for example, is underlining those energy crisis hotspots. I think I've got a map there. Sorry, this is just switching around a little bit, but so then this is just showing a kind of underlying data set, which is the proportion of homes that's EPC band D or below. So we kind of don't necessarily put this out as a kind of as an output, but it's sort of underlying to a lot of our analysis of understanding where homes are most inefficient and calling for those parts of the country to be kind of prioritized it for an national insulation rollout, that sort of thing. So I think I'm probably done. I'll share the slides later, so there'll be links to some of those data stories which have the maps embedded, but they've also kind of got a wider context and sort of what we're asking for in terms of policy. But I'll stop there, I think.
It's absolutely brilliant, Toby. Thank you so much. It's really fascinating. It's rather noisy in my background, so I'm going to ask Jules if he'd take over as the co-host, please. And if people have questions to ask you, if they could please use the hand raising facility in Zoom, that would make life much easier for everybody. So I'll ask Jules to take over, and perhaps Wendy is the first with a question. Thank you.
I was just trying to click on the red microphone. Anyway, thank you, Toby. That was really, really interesting. I wasn't expecting to make this today, and at 5 to 12, I was able to. So I've sort of feel like I gate crashed it, but I'm so pleased. Can you just confirm? I can't remember if I caught what your role is within Friends of the Earth, and also the maps you were showing. I'd love to have a look at them in my own time. And is that where I can access them is through the website?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll all those maps that I showed, I'll put direct links to them, as well as we tend to have them embedded in wider stories, because
Oh,
obviously a
okay.
map on its own is not what we're trying to like push action. So it'd be like, here's the analysis, this is what we think it means, and this is what we're asking for. So it's like always policy implications and what the kind of campaign asks we like. But I'll put in those sort of web page stories, if you like, the policy pieces, but I'll also put links to
Yeah.
like directly to the kind of map.
Yeah, 'cause I'm just looking to get more focused on. I'm in Stonehouse in Gloucestershire, so only just up the road from you, Bristol. But obviously, looking if it is just information more for a bigger area. I'm just looking just to keep nibbling away at the council to say, are we doing enough? Because I don't feel like we are, and it'd be really interesting to see, what else can we do for helping people get insulation and whatever. And there's been programs and some money, but it was like a handful of houses in our town. But anyway, so I'm just looking to sort of see if I can pick up on any really useful data just to work on to say, look, we need to do something.
Yeah, and the other thing that I don't know if you heard that mentioned, the tool called the Near You tool, where you basically
Yeah,
put your
I've
postcode.
written
So
that
that
down.
does, but at a local authority level, that produces, it does
Brilliant.
show this where things are at the moment, and there's a sort of series of targets of where things should be. So it'd be, for example, yeah, homes that run insulated, they'll give you a number, and it should, well, that one, one of our policies, and also committing on climate change, is that all homes should be EPCC by 2035. So it kind of shows how far each local authority has to go to get there.
I could just chat to you, but I'm conscious that it's not just me, so I'll write
Yes.
my question in the chat. But
Sure.
thanks a lot.
Okay. Oh, and your other question was what's my role? So my job title is environmental data lead. So I'm the kind of environment data guy at Friends of the Earth, if that helps. Amanda, are you next?
Yeah, I think it's Amanda. Over to Amanda.
My apologies. Zoom said no for the first five plus minutes, so I did miss your introduction, I'm afraid. Thank you very much. I'm a scientist in the sense that evidence is always important, and if you can inform with facts that can't be disputed, then you've got a much more powerful tool to make your case or to support your case. And I guess one of the main question I've got is, of the things that you're sharing with us and that we can access publicly, how much are usable? I mean, is it open source, and or is there an etiquette about? I mean, I would always try and state my source, etc. But can you tell us about how we can use it to make a case locally? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's always difficult knowing. With local groups and local activists, you've always got to kind of understand or be considerate of the kind of expertise in local groups. So, you can imagine, particularly with our local group, someone might be a kind of a data guru or a GIS expert, and we happily take like raw data and just like make their own maps with it, while other people make much more hand holding. So, and again, and from our point of view, it's kind of an element of like, we've also got time constraints, and so how much hand holding can we do? So it's one we're kind of always constantly grappling with, and we do, like we have that network I mentioned, we do kind of always ask, how can we help you, and what data can we get in your hands, and in what format? I'd say so, which is, and it's partly why the reason we make those maps, and those maps are all available online, is as a kind of initial thing. You can put in your postcode, you can see some stats. In some cases, it will be sort of identifying. Sadly, a lot of them are identifying what is wrong rather than what can be achieved, which is frustrating. So, like sort of pollution or sewage spills. But there are, the renewables map, and the kind of tree canopy map is kind of showing what, also providing some sort of level of solutions. So I guess the maps are really, you can be used to go, okay, this is what's going on in my area or surrounding areas next door looks pretty good. Why aren't we like that? That, you know, in a way, that's kind of evidence in itself. Keep talking about the near you tool, but I think that is also really useful in kind of, again, just identifying some clear goals. What it also says as part of that tool is what are the kind of priority things to do in an area if guidance is sort of needed. And that's across our network. We've got groups who are really on it and know exactly what they want to do and just need very little support from our kind of head office, if you like. Other groups are a bit like, we're quite overwhelmed here and we're not, like, there seems to be a lot of things. What is the issue? And in that case, the tool will say, well, in your area, it's probably, if you were looking to kind of focus on an area, like transport seems to be an area to work on, or housing, or what have you. So there are kind of various tools, you know, not tools, there are various kind of links and calls to action and sort of things, if you know, that you can do. Kind of, it's not a case of we don't just put out their data and go, here's some data, here bad it is. It's kind of, here's some data, this is what could be done, here's a way of kind of emailing your local authority, or kind of forming a group, or kind of some resources that you can use as part of a local campaign. I feel like I'm waffling and not really answering a question.
Well, maybe this might help. I'm involved with the parish and town council as a parish councillor, and also I clerk occasionally. But I'm also representing 38 parish and town councils on our local Cotswold National Landscape on the board. And we were looking at priorities, and we were doing this mapping and putting overlays and using GIS, using a lot of analysis to sort of check that the priorities that we'd assumed were the right ones to be going for, in terms of things like, I don't know, 2050 net zero, or around sustainable tourism, or whatever it is we're looking at. I just wanted to make sure that we're not just going with the myth and the legend that is this issue, and that it's truly data based. I mean, my level's at a master's level. It's not at your level, maybe, but you know, if my question really is, are all these tools that we can go and check, are we allowed to quote them and publish them?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, so we make sure that the majority of our data we use comes from open source providers anyway, so there's no kind of issue with that, with us reproducing and passing it on. And secondly, no, that's a really, you know, really big part of what we're doing. We don't want to be gatekeepers, or, you know, we don't have any commercial interest in this data. You know, it's more like we want see people use it and use it as best they can to inform what they're doing, or make action happen. So that's, you know, our aim is not to make pretty data and maps and stop there. Like, that's not, you know, other people do want to do that, and I love looking at pretty maps. But, you know, the whole point of this is like, so what? Like, here's some data. So what? What does it mean? What should we do with it? And which sounds slick, but actually it's still really hard sometimes to answer those questions and understand and pick through it all and kind of find a clear message. And the reality is, I think, I don't think a lot of local stuff should be driven by the data. It should be supported by the data. So, like, you know, if in a local area, you'll know in your parishes what the key things are, what people are talking about, what concerns them, what they're worried about. And then at that point, you can look at data and go, okay, does that support what we're trying to do? Rather than
so come up with your hypothesis first and see if the data.
In most cases, I think so, yeah. But I think because data can be, you're right in saying like data is really helpful in being supported, but data can be looked at in different ways and choose to support different arguments in different ways as well. So I think the data, I see data as being something that supports us. You know, we've got some great campaigners at Friends of the Earth, and I would never go, this is what you should do first because the data says it. The campaigners would be like, we're doing this campaign, how can data help support our campaign and provide statistics or provide some evidence that supports that campaign that we know is popular? So that's what I'd say to that. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So that's basically causation rather than correlation.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Toby. Tristram has his hand raised. I think he's next. And then following that, I'll read out a question from the chat.
Yeah, Toby, I just wondered about duplication of data from other sources. To what extent do you create data, sort of original data yourselves? And to what extent do you rely on other sources? So one example, for instance, is the ONS, I know, produce a map of multiple deprivation, and index to multiple deprivation at an LSOA area. Have you added to that data, or have you created your own map?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I think too much duplication does go on, partially because some of the data work is being done by private companies who kind of need to, their kind of business model involves them kind of having data and generating that data and then selling it, which is fine. I think, for example, when the tree map that we did, which is quite interesting, we did that. Like I said, an organization produced that map for us, and then we were okay, we're going to put that out, let people know it's there, let people know how we can use it. Almost within about a month of that, and us advertising an event and a seminar where we published it, there was about 3 or 4 other pieces of similar but slightly different analysis came out looking at kind of tree cover across the country, which is kind of good. But everyone was doing sort of similar things, but in silos, not communicating. So it's a real problem, and I guess the way that organizations are structured and work in their business cases means that it's hard sometimes to collaborate and work across organizations, which is
Yeah, just to go back to the ONS data.
Yeah, so
Did you take that data as a starting point and then refine it, or is it a parallel piece of work?
It's a parallel site. So the index of multiple deprivation is great, and we use that quite a lot, underlining some to produce kind of understanding. So the energy crisis hotspots, we use that as an underlying data source. But that's very much about kind of like social deprivation. So it brings in, it's got like about 7 or 8 domains covering housing, income, kind of physical environment, various things like that. But the one we're looking at is very much only using environmental data. So it's kind of, how would you describe it really? It's a similar process, but it's using almost entirely different data sets. I don't think there's any overlapping data sets. Right. It's very much focused on understanding sort of environmental deprivation. So it's really looking at pollution, climate impacts, and access to kind of nature as well. So kind of, so that tree covers as part of it. So it's almost like I would say it's more like a sister project. And we have one of the guys at Strathclyde University was kind of one of the people who worked on it originally on the IMD as well. So kind of is aware of the kind of history of that as well. It's useful to hear that, but it's not, no, I wouldn't say that's probably not a duplication. It's kind of, a duplication of method, but different data sets, if you like. Okay. So very much an environmental deprivation. Yeah. But it's a good question. Yeah, duplication it happens a lot, I think, in the data world, and there's a lot of people doing very similar things all at the same time in silos. And actually, in an ideal, perfect world, you'd have all those people coming together to produce that more efficiently. But yeah,
thank you.
Thanks, Toby. And really fascinating to hear about IMED, which covers pollution, climate impacts, and access to nature. It will become really important data set moving forward, I'm sure. The question in the chat is, I seem to have lost it. How much is Friends of the Earth focusing on making recommendations based on the data being provided? And is there a plan to utilize AI in analysis, analyzing the health of a local area, making suggestions for potential interventions? I can say from my perspective, that is a question I've asked our development team and some of our experts in our team at the Great Collaboration. So very interested in your thoughts.
So on the first question, which is definitely easier, always trying to look to make recommendations with the data. I think I sort of alluded that with asking Amanda's question, but yeah, it doesn't. We never want it to stop at here's some data and here's some statistics. It's always so what does that mean, and what should happen as a result of that, particularly if it's data around identifying areas where things aren't as good as they could have been: air pollution or sewage pollution, water pollution, cold homes. It's always a case of this is the problem, and the data identifies that problem. Sometimes the data will identify a solution, or there'll just be like a policy thing that's needed. So in the case of our warm homes campaign, the data identifies how many homes are below standard, which means people are struggling either to pay their bills or living in cold homes or both. There's also data there on understanding how many homes could benefit from loft and cavity and solid wall insulation. And so then the ask becomes, we need a national insulation program that's publicly funded that hits the coldest homes first. And here's some stats to show you how much is needed to be done and how much that will cost and how much we think should be spent annually on that program. So that's a kind of forms a whole kind of ask, and then that becomes a big thing. We're getting our local campaigners to push their local MPs or representatives to ask for that policy, and the build up to the election is quite interesting, and it's quite a singular piece of time where we there's going to be a lot of people asking for a lot of things from their candidates. I can imagine a lot of bombarding, saying where do you stand on X, Y, and Z. But it's a really also important time to kind of really push that, because it's a chance where particularly now, a lot of policy can be made, or the new government can be influenced in the early days, probably more than they can when they're kind of been more established as a government. So yeah, always looking to see like what the so what, and what's the key ask, and what's the big change we want to have, and how data can support that.
Great.
In terms of AI, at the moment I haven't considered how AI can help, other than it helps me write data analysis code. But we do have sort of a team, and sort of colleagues in my team sit in another team called the experiments team. And they've been doing a lot of kind of grappling around AI, how it can help, what its kind of dangers are. So we are thinking about AI more broadly, and how it can help with kind of create, a good example is how it can create sort of a positive image of the world where we can get to. It can create images of beautiful green streets, or a green urban environment. But in terms of exactly data analysis, I've not considered it too much, to be honest. It sort of overwhelms me a little bit, AI sometimes.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks very much, Toby. So I've been involved in developing GIS systems for community-led development before, for a think tank called Shared Assets. And we created a mapping application called Land Explorer to support, as I say, community-led development. It was things like National Community Land Trust Network, and making local woods work, and neighbourhood planning groups, and this kind of thing. Tristram on the call is from Parish Online, which is a paid-for service for town and parish councils with loads of really helpful data in. And as the Great Collaboration, we're publishing a variety of different data sets. So it's really fabulous to hear about your work. In terms of AI, I'm lucky enough to be working with a woman called Carrie Lomas, who lectures at Oxford Side Business School, and she headed up Intel's Internet of Things and Machine Learning division for about 10 years. So there might be a fruitful conversation there to be able to put some metrics in, and have some machine learning actually spit out a bunch of recommendations in terms of priorities for an area as well, in terms of decarbonising. I'm particularly interested in the Warm Homes campaign, EPC data. We've got some UK Power Network funding to go and provide energy efficiency advice, including sort of face-to-face meetings, home visits, this kind of thing. And I'm really keen that it doesn't end at that point, and then we actually go and start to retrofit homes. So understanding, these kind of things is super important, where we can make the biggest difference to our communities. I'm also a parish councillor, so representative, and looking after our residents. I'm hoping that you can that we can access these maps, things like weather risk, heat and flooding. Again, very relevant for community climate action planning. And we've got a little bit of funding from a local resilience forum. Every county has a local resilience forum chaired by or organised by first responders, so police, fire, paramedics and what have you. And they're providing some funding because they're really interested in resilience. And actually, this particular bit of funding is from Sussex Police, looking at food insecurity and resilience. But I was particularly interested in seeing your heat and flooding, and the amount of excess deaths we might see. I've got a couple of questions. One is the duplication of data in different data sets. So I've looked at your map with regards to renewable energy for potential community renewable energy sites from Exeter. There's also a separate data set called IRENES that you might be familiar with, that's being used by Greater South East Net Zero Hub, UK Power Networks, and I think Stefan made We Want Wind with the IRENES data. And there is a difference. So as a user, both help with desktop feasibility studies before progressing to a community energy fund application. But I'm just sort of wondering about that difference. I mean, that's one question, is which data should should we use? You may not. You may just say, well, they're both an estimate. I don't know. So that's my first question. The second is, I'm really fascinated by the tree canopy layer using LiDAR. And to what degree are you tapping also into perhaps citizen science with regards to home energy surveys or bioblitzes, river dipping, and or tapping into commercial data sets from service providers that are in particular looking at natural capital for farms and large landholders in particular, and that's with relevance to novel forms of income, things like biodiversity net gain, soil carbon sequestration, and meeting statutory biodiversity duties. So there's a bit of an arms race going on there at the moment, using quite a lot of AI, actually, mostly satellite imagery, to do carbon, natural capital accounting and carbon data. So two questions there: citizen science and which kind of data set should we perhaps be looking at moving forward?
Yeah, the renewables and duplications are another good example of that. So we took a while getting that renewables data out because we needed to just sense check it and make sure we're doing everything right and consider a lot of planning considerations and constraints. So end up getting that out a little bit later than we hoped, as is often the way. And then we published it, and quite soon after we published it and had a media story around it, we saw the We Want Wind website, and we saw the IRNS data set as well.
Yeah.
And then we ended up having a seminar, sort of inviting both the people representatives for all. Stefan came along to that, and then
that's right. I was actually on the webinar.
You were the webinar, yeah.
And
so
I've also dived in the conversation on the environment.
Yeah, that's right. I thought you're familiar. Yeah. So that was another case of like, oh, okay, we're all doing this, and no one was aware that we were all doing it, sort of similar but slightly different things. In that case, I think like we're more than happy to just like, I mean, I was really impressed by Stefan's talk when We Want Wind. I think it was incredible.
Yeah.
In that case, it feels like really, if we're going to keep working on this to support, we'd rather support him do that than us to keep doing our thing and him doing his thing. They serve slightly different like purposes, because our tool was really sort of understanding across a wider area, I think, like what could happen across the region.
Sorry to interrupt. Which is Stefan's tool?
His is We Want Wind.
Oh, We Want Wind. Okay.
I'll pop a link in the chat, and for those that might not know, it is a very helpful application that lets you look at where a suitable site for a wind turbine might be based on planning restrictions, based on average wind speed, heritage sites, SSIs, distance from housing, this kind of thing. I've already used it, dropped a pin, found a potential site, contacted the landowner's amenable, talked to the parish council, that kind of thing.
Yeah. I think so. Where we overlap with that was the sort of exclusion, the heritage, the kind of constraints that we applied very similar to his. So there's a case of making sure we're doing exactly the same thing, and if we've got differences in methodology, just kind of ironing them out a bit, and help, so if that's going to evolve, it'll help him and it'll help us. But I think we said at the end of that meeting we're more than happy to kind of put our resource into helping that tool evolve.
Fantastic. That sounds like a collaboration waiting to happen, really, between the Great Collaboration, perhaps Parish Online. Stefan's already asked, and perhaps you, Toby, at Friends of the Earth. Perhaps.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, more than happy.
Because this is the Great Collaboration after all.
Yeah, exactly.
And one question I didn't ask is, and actually something that sort of, again, might be missing from some of the published stuff we have, might come from our DNOs and from UK Power Networks, for instance. And I think Tristram's got an upcoming meeting with UK Power Networks, having dropped the pin that might be suitable for a wind turbine and finding out who owns the land. That's a bit of desktop feasibility work, which is brilliant. The evidence bases in EOI to the Community Energy Fund. What I don't yet understand, and I'm no expert, I'm pretty good with geospatial data, but I'm a steep learning curve on energy, is connectivity from the wind turbine. So what's the substation capacity? How do you connect the wind turbine to the grid? And that kind of data. And I'm pretty sure UK Power Networks have it, but I've really struggled to find it in a usable format on their sort of local net zero hub data portal.
I had exactly the same problem, to be honest with it.
It's not just me there.
Baffling. And I did manage to find the locations of their kind of primary substations. But
Yeah,
I couldn't find, or if I could, it was seemed to be a different format of the kind of capacity, grid capacity.
yeah,
But mostly what I found with the grid capacity stuff was the grid is kind of that capacity in most places. So I think we were kind of considering doing that on a map. Can we add grid capacity in or not? And really, the kind of evidence all just points to the fact that the grid needs massive investment and boosting anyway. So, if we're looking at kind of even doing a fraction of kind of the areas that we suggested in that map, you're already looking at needing a significantly boosted grid. There are some areas which are close and you can connect to, but they already says like grid's at capacity or doesn't have much like headroom. So yeah, it's. I think an element you could do that analysis, but I think you'd come to the conclusion that most of this can't be connected. We just need a massive investment in the grid.
Yeah. Or look at storage and smart energy.
And storage and all the things happen. I think So
direct supply and PPAs and all that kind of stuff. So.
I think the other trouble with you can't just use data to analyze how long it will take to make a connection, because there is a massive regulation. I've got a nephew who works in this area, and he said it's just fun. He talks to me about it. I have no idea what he's telling me. It's really complicated, and you have to do there's endless regulations you have to go through and analysis you have to go through. So I think that data just doesn't exist in a simple form.
I mean, in terms of the time taken, yes, but in terms of desktop feasibility, the data does. I've seen it on a UKPN map. And actually, we're quite lucky in East Anglia. It has a traffic light, green, amber, red, and it's mostly green around East Anglia in terms of substation capacity.
Yeah.
In terms of headroom. But yes, that just helps with the desktop feasibility. Should we? It might just rule it out, because if it just says red and it's no, there's no point in looking at it. So it's sort of better data makes better informed decisions.
But then the ask becomes, well, it's not a no. It's just we need to do these other things, which is invest in the grid, rather, initially, and then it will be green, and we can do this because we do need to put more renewable energy in.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You had a question on sort of citizen science, which is a good one. We're always having conversations about this and like how can we do more of it, and it's. Again, we've got a quite small unit. It's just really just two of us at the moment. So it's this constant balance of like everything we'd love to do and the realities of finite time.
Absolutely.
But we have done projects in the past. Before I was here, we did an air pollution kind of citizen science project where people had I've forgotten the name of them, but they were kind of tube sensors that they were collected over various parts of the country and fed that into some data. We've talked about doing water sampling, but I think can be really expensive. So again, it comes down to sort of finding funding to do that. Something I personally would love to do. I'd love to get a lot of water sampling stuff. But again, there are other organisations doing this sort of thing. So there are various local campaigns trying to get bathing sites recommended. So it's a case of, do we initiate that, or do we just try and link up and identify people doing it and kind of support that as best we can, or promote what they're doing. So.
Okay, cool. Yeah, we do river dipping. We've done testing on we've got in our community benefit society, we've got 10 acres of land and a pub, and the 10 acres of land adjoins the Little Ouse, and we're right at the heart of the Waylor, which is the Waveney and Little Ouse recovery project, sponsored by Natural England and DEFRA, this kind of thing, engaging with farmers. So we're regularly testing our water. We've got other community groups like Hadley Heat. That's the Hadley Environmental Action Team. They are doing the River Stour, I think, is it? Particularly, so there's quite a few bits of data. The BioBlitz is going on, I think, organised by the Wildlife Trust, and there are some open source sites to upload results to. So that might be really quite interesting, in particular in terms of the index of multiple environmental deprivation, and actually on a professional basis, working with regenerative agriculture and farmers. We've developed some technology, SAS technology, with in-field sensors for environmental monitoring, and then SAS and AI analysis. And I'm kind of interested to explore that from a parish level. So each parish, we now have a biodiversity duty for all local authorities as a statutory duty to consider our local nature-based recovery strategies in things like considerations for planning and what have you. so we're looking at perhaps sort of sensor in a box kind of thing that would measure a variety of indicator species and health and precipitation and stuff, to be able to, at a price point cheap enough for a parish to just take on and move around a few times. That might be another interesting collaboration that we could consider between the Great Collaboration, because we have an audience of town and parish councils with the SLCC, etc. So
yeah, that sounds brilliant. Yeah, that sounds really good.
how exciting! Cool, I love these calls. So we're getting pretty much at 1 o'clock. So I'm wondering, who else might have a question, or who else would like to add anything before we leave?
Just a quick question. You did mention, if that's possible, you did mention, Toby, about political parties, and I just wondered, has any particular party been working with you and asking for your data, and or is it not quite how it is?
Not quite how it is. We it's really important we maintain kind of independence from associated political parties. So
I was thinking more from them. Are they initiating and recognizing all the important data that you've got?
We got an angry phone call from Labour saying we'd misjudged their climate stance. My colleague Mike did an initial kind of assessment of their sort of environmental policies and scored Labour, I think, 51 out of 100. And apparently they picked up the phone and said, "You've massively represented us." And I'm like, "Well, produce a good manifesto and we'll give you a better score next time." So there will be some manifesto scoring coming out on like where the party stand on their environment. I think it's coming out next week. Do we work? I'm not aware of any direct.
No, so they're not being proactive in looking at linking and using your data. Okay, it's all right.
Not that I'm aware of, but it's not to say it wouldn't happen in the future. But I think
fingers crossed for an administration that will be really interested in the data to make better informed decisions on an environmental index of multiple environmental deprivation. Wouldn't that be cool? Wouldn't that be really cool if we support Toby's work and lobby on behalf of, or join lobby on behalf of Friends of the Earth for this to become a policy? So, any other passing comments? I just want to say how fascinating I found the presentation from Toby. Any other passing comments?
No, just thank you very much again for your time and input.
And Graham,
no problem. If I'll sort of tidy up the slides and I'll just share them with Graham, and then I guess he can circulate them with everyone.
Do you have a link to the map where we can actually look at the sort of heating and flooding and
yeah, I just wonder the best way of sharing it. Whether is that if I put it in an email that can be shared, is that the best way, or is it I can put it in, I can put it in the chat now? There's the
if you pop it in the chat now, Toby, I'll be saving the chat for as we generally do for future reference. We can circulate the link and slides to everyone via email.
Can I jump in and say how excited I am at the thought of this tie-up that we've just talked about, and that's exactly what these great banter sessions and the great collaborations all about. And that's why, giving up an hour of your time every week at the same time, it sounds quite onerous, but actually, I don't think there's a single person here who doesn't just look forward to it. And it's part of the reason for getting up in the morning. So Toby, Jules, Tristram, and anybody else who was just part of that, getting it together, well done. And let's be excited. Thank you.
Wow, what fantastic feedback. Thanks, Amanda.
Yeah, thanks for your enthusiasm.
Yeah, I think Graham's sort of pinged off on and off mute. I'm not sure if Graham, you want to say anything before we depart?
Well, just to say thank you so much for Toby, particularly through struggling through after his dentist appointment. So I'm really impressed, and I think the information was invaluable, absolutely tremendous. So looking forward to more of it. Thank you all so much. And thanks, Jules, for taking over.
Yeah, my pleasure. And Toby, I look forward to further conversations on the Environmental Data Network and see what we can do together moving forward.
I'll send a link to that as well, yeah.
Yeah, and again, awesome. Thank you so much for what an amazing piece of work. And anything else you'd like to say?
No, other than thanks very much for having me and for being so enthusiastic. Sometimes you don't always get such a receptive audience to data, but it was it's nice to talk to people who are really interested and enjoyed it. So yeah, thanks for having me.
We may not be aware of it.
That's good.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so
Fabulous.
much. Bye bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great week. We'll see you next time.